The intro to this interview was sadly cut off, but enjoy the rest of it. Here's Dr. James Barger.
The very first year I was here was fall of 2016, and I was approached by Dr. Nick Scales, who at that time was running the second jazz band, and he said, "Hey, it'd be a really good opportunity for you for tenure and things like that to take over the second jazz band." And so I started doing that the very first semester I was here. I was teaching all classical saxophone and all the things that involves, studio class, saxophone ensemble, coaching quartets, things like that, and then running the second jazz band. Over the years, some students would approach me asking, do you teach jazz improv lessons? And is that something that I could sign up for? And so I've been doing that now for the last few years. And so, my studio door, I joke around, is sort of a revolving door of people coming in and out. A lot of saxophone students, but now I have trumpet students, trombone students, piano students, guitar students, just this really cool rotation. So it's a real interesting aspect of my job and what I get to do.
Interesting. Well, you did mention you play saxophone. How long have you been playing saxophone for?
So I started playing saxophone in 6th grade, as many people do, in Texas music education. So I guess I was about, 12, 13 years old. So, a little bit over half my life now playing saxophone, primarily classically trained. So I grew up in the North Dallas area, which of course is pretty well known for jazz and jazz education, being just about 15, 20 minutes from UNT. However, I had no jazz opportunities. My middle school, high school, we didn't have a jazz band, we didn't have a jazz program. So that wasn't something that I got into until actually when I came to college. I was kind of a little bit of a late bloomer when it came to jazz. I felt like very well prepared to go into college as a classically trained saxophonist. And I felt like a 6th grader all over again when it came to playing jazz and approaching that.
What made you get interested into jazz? Because you did say you went to college not playing jazz. What was the push to make you want to kind of see what jazz is about? Yeah,
so honestly, I got into jazz. I didn't really grow up listening to jazz. I wasn't really exposed to it from a very early age. Obviously, I knew the music existed, but it just wasn't really music that was being played in my household or in the car growing up or anything like that. Honestly, I got into jazz because I just felt like as a saxophonist, it was sort of expected of me. Maybe that's not the best answer, but that's kind of the truth. It was just like sort of this like peer pressure and this career pressure that if I want to really make it as a saxophone player, being strictly classically trained is not going to present as many opportunities for me. So when I came to WT, I auditioned my freshman year. Actually made it into the top jazz band, not because I was a good jazz musician. I honestly had no idea what I was doing. I got in because I was a good classical player. I had good technique, I had good tone quality, and I could sight read really well. So I made it into the top jazz band, and for that entire first semester that I was coming to rehearsals, I kid you not, I would like sweat through my clothes. I was so nervous. Oh my gosh, like look down, I hope he doesn't ask me to solo. I don't know how to improvise. Like very much this sort of imposter syndrome. And so after a semester, I actually dropped out. I dropped out for that spring, and then I didn't even audition the next year. Jazz was something that to me was like so monumental and such an unknown side of music, and it was very intimidating. And I hated feeling like a beginner, especially on my primary instrument. And so it was really scary. And so I just avoided it for the longest time. And then I kind of started feeling guilty and decided, man, this is something I really need to figure out how to do if I want to be an effective performer, a successful educator. And so my junior year, I re-auditioned. This time I, again, made the top band. I was lead alto. And so now all the solos were coming my direction. And so that was for me like really kind of the first steps into like, okay, I don't have an option now. I can't back away. I have to like really try to start to figure out this jazz thing.
You did mention you were really nervous about playing jazz for the first time. What was the difference in classical and jazz when you started playing? So was there like a huge shock and different style and different ways you had to play and stuff like that?
Well, I think the biggest thing is simply what the composer gives you versus what the composer doesn't give you. You know, in classical music, we spend a lot of time interpreting what is on the written page. And so obviously there is some room for some artistic license and some interpretation, but most of the information is given to us. The exact notes to play, the exact rhythms, at which dynamic, at which style, all of that information. For jazz music, it's kind of the Wild West. And so obviously, like, a lot of the same things apply. You have to play with a good sound. You have to have decent technique in order to facilitate what you're trying to communicate. But with jazz music, it's you're really trying to be in the moment and give an interpretation. It would be very similar to, like, maybe reading a prepared speech out loud to your class versus entirely just trying to wing it off the cuff.
I see. As a few people might know, you do gigs. You gig around the area. When did you start getting into performing other than school ensembles?
So I started that as an undergraduate student. I got a call from a lady by the name of Tanya. She lived in Oklahoma City, and she was playing lead tenor in this group called the Dick Morton Orchestra. And they used to play these dance gigs on the top floor of the First United Bank building downtown at the Amarillo Club. And so I got a call to fill in, and it was just a sight reading gig. I showed up, and they had this just lunchbox full of, like, hundreds and hundreds of charts. And so I was playing, like, third tenor saxophone with that group. And I did that a couple of times. Around the time that I was graduated with my undergrad and starting my master's degree, I started playing with Patrick Swindell with his group, which at that point was, they were called the Pizzazz Band.
I see.
And so I started playing with them, got to play with Lloyd Spoon, who was their trombonist, who he played with the Stan Kenton Orchestra, and he was a music director on cruise lines for many years. And so really had an opportunity to learn from him and the other musicians in that group. I moved away for a little bit and did my doctorate at Texas Tech down in Lubbock, and I wasn't gigging a whole lot while I was down there. I was playing in the Texas Tech, their top jazz band, but there weren't as many gigging opportunities, and I was sort of the new guy. I was only there for really a year living there. Interestingly enough, when I moved to Lubbock, I lost all of my regular gigs in Amarillo. And so when I moved back, I kind of was starting from scratch again. But around that time is, again, Patrick Swindell. He opened up the Esquire Jazz Club downtown and really gave us a lot of opportunities to form our own groups. And so I collaborated with other musicians. I put together my own ensembles, sometimes just a quartet, saxophone with rhythm section, other times with trumpet, trombone. But that's really kind of where it got started.
Well, for jazz musicians listening in that want to start getting into gigging, what advice do you have for them to find gigs, I guess? Because it's not as simple as someone calling you. What advice would you have for them?
I think you have to be known in the scene. And so usually that starts not with gigging, but going and supporting others on their gigs. So, if there's a jam session, or if there's a restaurant or a bar that has kind of a presence of jazz musicians, go and hang out and watch them. And then when they go on break, that's when you go and introduce yourself and get to know those musicians. Offer to help them haul their equipment to the car at the end of the gig, that sort of thing. I think you have to be a friend first and gradually get to know those people. And then when the time comes when, maybe they have a standing gig and something comes up and they need a sub, now you're the person that comes to mind. Oh, Kevin, he's a trumpet player. Okay, let's give him a call. And that's kind of how you start to break into the scene a little bit.
Yeah, very cool. Just a bunch of connections.
Lots of connections.
Most things are now.
You got to be, obviously you have to have, like, the work done in the shed. You got to be able to play the instrument. You have to be able to blend and balance and be respectful, not just, like, hog all the solos and that kind of thing. But I think you also have to be a really good hang, because I've played with some really, really good musicians that maybe weren't super fun to hang around. Whenever the band went on a break, like, maybe they weren't the nicest person or, that sort of thing. And so obviously, like, you have to do your homework as a musician and have the skills. But then also, like, if you're, if you're a pleasant person, you're going to be more likely to get that first call, and you're going to be more likely to get return calls week after week.
So you did say you teach the second jazz band here at WT, and of course you are a jazz musician. How does being an educator in jazz help your playing, if it even does?
Yeah, I think it absolutely does. Oftentimes, like, if I'm teaching a jazz improv lesson and I'm listening to a student play and then giving some feedback or some advice, there are lots of moments where I'm like, that thing I just said, I should try doing that myself, right? I should take my own advice. Being an educator, it forces you to approach problem solving from a lot of different angles. So maybe one student is really going to resonate with maybe like a chord scale approach. And so you might tackle improvisation from that angle. While another student, maybe they don't think of things very theory based, so more of kind of a creative right brain approach might help, or maybe just listening a lot and transcribing solos and imitating is more of an approach that helps them. So from an educator standpoint, like, I have to be able to help a student not just in the ways that help me learn, but whatever helps them to find their own way. And so that sense of creative problem solving is really helpful for me. I might be in the bandstand and start thinking of things in a slightly different way because maybe that's how I was helping a student earlier that day.
Growing up, or I guess going through college, learning about jazz, who were your biggest role models? Like, who would you look up to in your own band, or even people you would listen to that made you want to get better at jazz?
Yeah, so there were some saxophone players that were in the big band whenever I was here. Jared Raykemper grew up in the Plano area, and Ben Wilson grew up here right in Amarillo. He's a graduate of Amarillo High School. Those are the guys that were playing like lead alto, lead tenor whenever I was here going to school. So I always looked up to them. I also started going and listening to Polk Street Jazz, which consists of a lot of WT faculty. So Doug Story on tenor saxophone and clarinet, Nick Scales on bass, Jim Gardner on piano, Susan Tarek on drums. And so I would go and listen to them, and that was always really motivating and inspiring because I would see them by day as my teachers and my band directors and that sort of thing, and then to go and like actually see them doing the thing, that was really cool. So those were some of the people that I really looked up to. Obviously, like, listening to recordings really important, and getting together with friends and comparing notes and comparing favorite artists and favorite albums. That was really important and continues to be really important to me.
On the show in previous times, we talked about how jazz is very different from other music genres and how it shows a deeper connection to your emotions. Why do you think your emotions connected with jazz even on a deeper level than any other music genre?
I think jazz music, so much of it being based in improvisation, there's really no filter. Whereas if I'm composing a piece of music or writing a song in any genre, there's a kind of a period of maybe brainstorming and brain dumping, and then a series of going back and editing and trimming down, and then fleshing out this a little bit more, and then maybe this bridge is better as a chorus. You're rehashing things all the time. As an improvising musician, it's very much like the conversation that we're having right now. There's no going back and editing. We're living kind of like right here in the moment, and whatever you say is there permanently. So I think it really is kind of, in some ways, like the truest to the self kind of music. Definitely, like, any emotion that you bring to the gig is going to come out in your playing. Well,
this next segment is so far a pretty popular segment and sometimes controversial.
Oh gosh.
It's called "Is This Jazz or Not?"
Okay.
I'm basically gonna ask you different artists or things doing with jazz, and you have to tell me if you consider them jazz. Okay.
Okay.
First up, do you think Frank Sinatra is jazz?
Sure. Yeah, I think that Frank Sinatra is definitely represents a period of jazz. He's a great jazz vocalist. Also, I would call him a popular singer. Certainly the popular music of his time.
Do you know who Leve is?
Yeah.
Do you consider her jazz?
Yeah, I think jazz adjacent. There's definitely jazz influence in her music.
Okay, and then say band pieces, we always play Latin pieces in orchestra or in bands. Would you consider those bands, since they're not, I guess, classic jazz instruments, I guess you could say?
I think that jazz music, over time, as culture spreads, and ideas and influence spread, certainly there is a huge umbrella of what we consider to be jazz, and there are a lot of Latin styles of jazz. Certainly the bossa nova is really popular from Jamaica, and its influence, samba, and all kinds of Afro-Cuban music. So it's kind of the, I don't know, the chicken and the egg, or are some of those jazz? Yes, and jazz is encompassing of some of those styles as well. So yeah, I think it depends on the specific piece and everything, but certainly could be part of the jazz umbrella, so to speak.
So there's certain movies and video games now that are incorporating many jazz ideas, but obviously they're made completely different. It's, I guess, overproduced jazz. Would you consider that true jazz or no?
I mean, I think maybe true jazz perhaps has to have some element of improvisation. But I think it certainly could be influenced by jazz style.
And then I guess another one would be, a lot of video games are doing this too, where actual musicians are not playing the instruments. It's just a bunch of robots. Would you consider that jazz, since we talked about earlier, jazz is about feeling your emotions and the feelings you put into the music? Would you consider something that's so computer-like to actually be playing jazz, or just, I guess, reading what's on the page and calling it jazz?
Yeah, like I said, I think it could certainly be jazz influenced. Is it real jazz? Is it real music? If it's, does it come from, I guess, from the mind? I don't know. Maybe it's algorithmic. And people have figured out some things that sound like different kinds of music. There are certainly qualities of jazz music that set it apart. The use of chromaticism, the use of certain tensions and dissonances, time feel, swing, those kinds of things. So yeah, something could certainly sound jazzy. Is it real jazz? I'm not sure. Controversial, like you said.
Very. Well, the next question I have for you is a very interesting question I ask my guests. If you could pick the playing ability or the writing ability of any jazz artist ever, who would it be and why?
That's a good question. And lately on saxophone, I've been listening to a lot of Sonny Stitt. Sonny Stitt was such an amazing technician of the saxophone. He really got his start on alto saxophone, and at least from my understanding, he was often accused of just being like a Charlie Parker ripoff. He played all of Bird's licks, but better than Bird did. Talk about like controversy. But when I listen to Sonny Stitt, I'm like, man, this is like Charlie Parker Jr., but like with just cleaner technical ability on the saxophone. He very quickly switched and started playing a lot more tenor to kind of distance himself from Charlie Parker at that time. But when I think of technical ability, I think of Sonny Stitt. One of my favorite, like, more contemporary jazz musicians is the alto saxophonist Kenny Garrett. I think he's a great player. I love his sound. It's very unique. His tone on the saxophone sounds like nobody else I've ever heard. And I think he's a great composer as well. His album Songbook that came out in I think the mid-90s is just it's all original music. It's all really fantastic. He got his start playing with Miles Davis when he was 19 years old. If you could imagine, like, kind of your first like major gig playing with Miles Davis. But that's another name that comes to mind, that I really respect his voice as a composer, but also as an improviser.
As a music educator, how do you feel about maybe giving future students the hope of jazz to grow, like giving them a greater passion for jazz? I think we could probably say, like, there certainly has been like
sort of a golden age of jazz. And I don't know if jazz is as a big of a part of our popular culture today as it was in the 1920s, 30s, 40s. But gosh, if you listen to anything on the radio, there is a lot of jazz influence. Like I said, there's a lot of influence of the blues and of jazz. And there seems to be kind of this resurgence and this renaissance of jazz in popular music. You know, you look at like some of the big super groups like what Snarky Puppy are doing, or like Corey Wong and like all of the groups that he leads. So there's definitely like this resurgence. And so I think, and a lot of those musicians, they're young, they're ambitious, they have the skills, and they're really like bringing the style of music back. You even listen to R&B music and hip hop music, and there's a lot of jazz influence in there as well. Maybe not straight ahead 1940s bebop era jazz, but like you said, it definitely permeates popular culture. And we need young musicians to go out there and to continue to be the next generation of voices, and also to be the next generation of educators, to continue that going forward.
Yeah. Well, when you were starting to get into jazz, what were some of the standout artists you would listen to that really like stuck to you to I guess the jazz player you are now?
I mean, as a saxophone player, like I'm guilty. I listen to a lot of saxophone players. Certainly Joshua Redman was a really big influence of mine early on. Like I mentioned earlier, Kenny Garrett. One of the biggest compliments I got kind of early on whenever I was gigging, I was playing in a funk band locally called Thelonious Funk. And somebody came up to me like on a break and they were like, "Have you ever heard of the saxophonist Kenny Garrett?" And I said, "Yeah, he's my favorite." And they were like, "Man, you sound just like him." And that was like a huge compliment. You know, around that time I had been listening just on repeat to his albums and doing a lot of transcribing and trying to imitate his playing, which I think is one of the most important things that we can do as budding improvisers, is listening a lot, imitating, trying to copycat our heroes. So those two are big influences. Cannonball Adderley, of course, being primarily an alto saxophone player myself, was a big influence, all the work that he did with Miles Davis. Whenever I was starting to transcribe solos, Miles Davis was one that I spent a lot of time with, as many of us do. He has a way of playing real succinct ideas that are simple, simply put, and just kind of like saying exactly what needs to be said without a whole lot of extra fluff. And so it's a great way to begin getting into listening and transcribing. So yeah, those are some of the ones that come to mind.
Yeah. So as a few young musicians are starting to get into jazz, they struggle a lot with improvisation, right? And a lot of questions people ask constantly is, what goes through the musician's mind when they're improvising? Like, other than chords and what's the right notes to play in the style. So what goes through kind of your mind when you're writing new music, right, live in front of everyone?
Yeah, so this is a quote, and I'll butcher the quote, and I'll butcher it intentionally, from Charlie Parker. He says, "Practice, practice, practice, and then forget all that stuff and just play." And that's something that I try to convey to my students, that if you're on the bandstand and you're like in your brain trying to play music from this very academic or kind of overly analyzed state of mind, you're not really going to be able to convey the musical ideas. So maybe you're in the practice room and you're working on this minor 2-5-1 lick, or you're working on this turnaround passage, and that's great. And those are the things that we have to do. That's the homework you have to do. But then when you get on the stage and it's really obvious if like, oh, here's that minor 2-5-1, and I have to try to insert this lick that I've been practicing. It's kind of like I tell students, maybe in high school they took an SAT class, and they have all these like vocab lists, and you learn this like really cool, impressive vocabulary word, and then you try to like drop it casually, like at the checkout at the grocery store or something, and it's really awkward. And everybody like it's very clear, like you're trying to drop some big vocabulary word, and it's the same thing when when we're on stage
Yeah.
improvising. It's pretty obvious that like, okay, they're kind of noodling around, and then whoa, they just dropped this like blistering Charlie Parker lick, and it doesn't seem very sincere. So you practice all that stuff in the practice room, and then when you go out on stage, you just try to be in the moment and try to be expressive. You try to listen to what everybody else is saying. What is the drummer saying? What's the piano or guitar saying? It's, like I said, very much like a conversation. And we've all talked with people that conversation just flows effortlessly from one topic to the next.
Yeah.
And maybe somebody changes the subject and you just go with it seamlessly. And then we've also talked to people that everything always comes back to them.
Yeah.
And it's like very obvious that they sort of have an agenda that they're trying to push. And so when we're improvising, we want to try to be like the former rather than the latter, and really just go with the flow and be listening and being in the moment. And if the drummer does a real cool thing on the hi-hat, maybe it wasn't my initial plan to echo that, but I hear that as I'm playing and I might try to echo that or somehow respond to it.
Yeah. What are some of your fondest memories of gigging, if any come to mind?
Yeah, I have a few. With the group that I mentioned earlier, with Thelonious Funk, we did quite a bit here in the area. We played at Palace Coffee here in Canyon. We used to play at Leftwoods in Amarillo. I remember one night we played at Leftwoods until like 2 a.m. and then we had to be like up at 5 and on the road at 6 to go down to Midland to play. There was like some outdoor concert for a church fundraiser. So those kinds of things are super fun. Just being like really sleep deprived and on the road with your friends. And so those come to mind. All the gigs at the Esquire Jazz Club downtown in 2019 and early 2020, those were a lot of fun. Just a great chance for people would come up to us like on our breaks, like, man, how long has this group been playing together? And we'd be like, like the last 45 minutes, because like there were just a lot of musicians who were all playing, and we would get together and somebody would kind of quote unquote headline for that evening, and they would just reach out like, okay, I need a drummer. Let's, see who's available. I need a bass player. Let's see who's available. And all these groups would come together, and they were just these kind of like modular groups. And so, any given weekend you'd be playing with a group that literally had never played together. But because we're speaking a common language, we were able to jump in and call tunes and play. And that was always a lot of fun.
Yeah.
So I look back fondly on those memories.
Jazz is currently in a real rebuilding stage in its life. What do you hope for in the future, or even the near future, of jazz playing around the world?
I just hope people would give it a chance. I think that there's maybe this like stigma that jazz is like old music, or it's somehow stuffy, or I think also like the other side of that is that somehow like jazz music is too academic, or it's hard to understand what's going on. It's just noise. So I would love to see people just really give the music a chance. I think the cool thing about this kind of like rebuilding and rebirth of jazz is, like I said, there's a lot of influence in other popular genres. So you have, music that's kind of marrying like jazz and funk, or jazz and hip hop, or like you said, like jazz is being used in video games, and so I think like just this improvisatory based music coming back. There's a lot of different entry points to get into this genre of music.
What are some of your favorite jazz subgenres to listen to and to play?
So I love listening to modal jazz. So it's music that utilizes fewer chord changes, and those chords last for a longer period of time. And so those pieces to improvise over, it's kind of just like a tapestry or a landscape to really explore sound and note choices. Whereas maybe like bebop tunes are a lot faster tempo with really rapidly changing chords. And so you're really trying to weave in and through these chord changes. But yeah, modal jazz, I really enjoy listening to and improvising over. Anything that's like real funky and bluesy, that's always fun to play over. Something that's like really coming at it from like a rhythmic grooving standpoint. Always enjoy playing that kind of thing. So rock, funk, bluesy kind of jazz.
Well, as we're coming to the end of our interview, what advice do you have for up-and-coming jazz musicians or even current jazz musicians?
I think just get out there and play and make opportunities for yourself. Jazz music and really any live music, it can't happen in a vacuum. While there is a lot of jazz happening on university campuses and other live music, we have to get out into the community if we really want to create an interest and create audiences for the art that we're putting out there. So I think just, really putting yourself out there. Don't wait and sit in the practice room until you feel like you're ready. The only way to become ready is to really take that first step.
Yeah. Well, thank you for being on. I guess I'll give you this little moment to shout out anything that you're about to do. Shout out any musicians in the area that you really appreciate. Just whatever you'd like to shout out or promote, I guess.
Sure. There's a lot of really cool things going on in the jazz community. Definitely check out the Amarillo jazz scene on Instagram. Austin Brazil is heading that up and doing some really exciting things. There's live jam sessions happening Sunday nights at the 806 on 6th Street in Amarillo. There's a lot of things going on at the Western Horseman Club. You can check out Austin Brazil playing, Sergio Almanza, Emily Sotelo, Zach Lim. There's a Amarillo Jazz Society big band that performs, once or twice a semester. We just played this past Monday, so hopefully we'll get something else lined up. There's a lot of current students and local music educators and performers that play in that group, so that's a lot of fun. Definitely check that out Monday nights at the Western Horseman Club.
Perfect. What song would you like to request to be played next on the radio?
So I've been listening to a lot of this group. They're called Something Else, which is like a jazz super group headed by Vincent Herring, a great alto saxophone player. And so I'd like to hear their recording of Strasbourg Saint Denis, which is a great Roy Hargrove tune, but performed by Something Else.
Perfect. Thank you so much for coming on my show today. I really appreciate it. Elliot, let's give a round of applause. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Of course. Anyways, everybody, make sure to stay tuned. We have so many more great tracks coming up next, so just make sure to stay tuned. This is KWTS 91.1 FM.